Welcome to the Great Beer State podcast from the Michigan Brewers Guild. The Great Beer State is a weekly show sharing conversations and stories from the passionate people who contribute to our vibrant Michigan beer community. It is made up of a mix between full-length archived interviews from the Guild's first documentary book project, A Rising Tide, Stories from the Michigan Brewers Guild, and conversations recorded in the here and now. Each episode is kicked off with a conversational update from host Scott Graham, Executive Director of the Guild, and the beer-evangelist Fred Biltman, author of A Rising Tide. Here's Scott and Fred. Welcome back to Michigan's Great Beer State podcast. We are in Season 2, Episode 1. It's 2021, and we're off to a brand new start. Welcome, Scott Graham. Happy New Year.
Thanks, Fred, and Happy New Year to you. Yeah, I think it's really cool that we're starting Season 2 here in January. Snowy northern Michigan. It's been kind of a mild winter so far, which I think means that February and March will be pretty heavy winter months, but we shall see. They're all going to be good beer drinking months, though.
Yeah, we shall see is right. And, it seems odd to be saying Happy New Year because we spent a lot of time together on Zoom over the last couple of weeks, including 3 days of speakers and engaging conversations with the virtual winter conference put on by Brewers Guild, the Master Brewers, and Michigan State University Extension. So we're kind of just coming off of that. It was an exciting time. Any post-conference thoughts for the listeners out there?
Well, just that I really enjoyed the conference. It was, we had quite an internal discussion as we started to think in the planning process that an in-person event might not happen. And then we started to thinking it probably wasn't a likely plan. And we had to then follow up that with a couple of discussions about, do we do something virtually or do we just pass? Is everybody zoomed out, or is there appetite for getting together? And then once we decided to, we had to kind of structure a new format, find some tools to utilize to do it. You put a lot of work in behind the scenes to make the logistics happen, in addition to being, a key part of the planning. But all in all, I thought it came off really well. We had fun speakers and good sessions, and we had a virtual trade show component, which I think was set up nicely. We had some of our allied members present in there, and we're leaving that open. That's a free thing that people can get in and take a look at those vendors if they'd like to. It requires registration, and that's staying open for a couple of months afterwards, in hopes that there's some lasting interest. So that, I guess it's a little promotion for that. If you go to our website, you can click on it, or you can use your Expo Pass link if you were already registered. It's still active.
Yeah, and the talks are all still up. So if you're a registered conference guest attendee, you can go watch those talks. And I think you can still register if you wanted to. Is that right?
I believe so, yeah. I think so, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. And I thought one of the cool things is that we always have speakers from pretty far and wide because our conference has a history behind it, and our guild has a history, and I think our relationships bring people in. But it's rare to be able to get a docket full of people from far and wide all in the same year. And so, getting Garrett Oliver and Vinny Chilurzo and Jamie Floyd and many others, Lindsay Barr, was really interesting because even though we didn't get to hang out in person and have the post-conference beers, we did get to cover a lot of miles and have some really brilliant minds from the industry all here, one after another. It was pretty cool.
We sure did. And one of the new elements this year that we really didn't get to explore fully was this integration of the annual Great Lakes Hop and Barley Conference, which is a thing put together largely by MSU Extension. I've helped some every year. And we've talked for a couple of years about integrating the conferences so that the different groups of people, these growers and suppliers of barley and malt and hops, could have an opportunity to interact with people from breweries. And so we already had a really great collaboration that's been going on for years with the Michigan Brewers Guild and the Master Brewers Association District Michigan, which are great counterpoints to each other, and it brings a really compelling attendees and speakers, and the planning process with those folks, Alec Mull and John Mallett, just really makes our conference an even better thing. And to add this hop and barley element really takes the collaboration to a next level. And this year they were more fully integrated than they might have been in person, because the agriculture tracks would have been a separate track. So if somebody wanted to go see it, it would have been in addition. And we had to kind of blend them together this year, which worked well, but it was not what we really started planning when we started planning it together. So interesting thing to think about looking at next year too.
Yeah, and I hope that one of the benefits was that some people who might not have gone to an agricultural talk did, and maybe your brewers got a little more crossover education, and hopefully same for the growers, that they might have heard some brewers talks that they might not have heard otherwise, which is different when you have parallel tracks happening going on opposite sides of the hall. So anyways,
yeah, and I know from some conversations that indeed did happen. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks to everybody that supported it, attendees, Allied Trade, the committee. It was really fun to be a part of. And, I think it's a testament that we keep the train rolling and finding ways to engage, finding ways to educate ourselves, and even in these crazy times. So just proud of that. And thanks to everybody that participated. So it seems like a good time to jump into our Brewers Dozen for this week. You want to talk about the region that you selected and get us started?
Yeah, I took a look at the southwest corner of the state. So the southwest corner of the Lower Peninsula, and there's really a great cluster of breweries down there. I haven't gotten to all of them, but I have really enjoyed visits to quite a number of them. And it's kind of a little brewery center. I guess there are many of them in the state now, but yeah, if we start in New Buffalo, we have Beer Church Brewing Company, renovated church. They're known for their fantastic pizzas and good beer.
And then not too far down the road in Baroda, you've got Round Barn Brewery and Public House, which is one of 3 locations we're going to mention here under the Round Barn umbrella.
Yeah, I think Round Barn started with their winery operation, but they've been operating their brewery for years, and they've got multiple tasting rooms and locations. Their second location in Baroda, they call a Round Barn Brewery Distillery, Round Barn Winery Distillery and Brewery Tasting Room and Estate. So it's their winery estate there. So 2 locations in Baroda.
And then one more, Round Barn Winery Distillery and Brewery Tasting Room in Union Pier. Again, kind of in that corner.
And if you travel a little further north on your trip to Bridgman, you have 2 breweries, first of which is Tapestry Brewing Company.
And second of which is Transient Artisan Ales.
And then not too far from Bridgman, in Stevensville, there is Watermark Brewing Company.
And then nestled in there, not too far away in Benton Harbor, you've got Silver Harbor Brewing Company. I also find it interesting when I think about the geography here. It's like I've traveled 94 back and forth so much that I think of these as exit numbers. And, their geography is a little different because you're not always, it's just, it's part of the lakeshore areas. It's not always on a grid. So these breweries, I guess I'm on a digression, but these breweries are a great reason to get off and travel the local roads and understand the area a little bit better. But Benton Harbor, I left off with Silver Harbor Brewing Company.
Yes, and the livery is also in Benton Harbor, longtime Michigan Brewers Guild member, and as you might guess, it's in an old livery building.
And then you've got North Pier Brewing Company.
Then a little further along, and a little more inland in Watervliet, you have Arclight Brewing Company.
And then in Dowagiac, wrapping up the list for this week's Brewers Dozen, you've got Sister Lakes Brewing Company. So that's our shout out to,
that makes up
that's our shout out to 13 breweries or so every week, our first one in the new year. So go and check those breweries out, give them a shout, and either visit them in person for beer to go, or hopefully someday we'll be eating and drinking indoors again. So that is
we're hopeful that February 1st we will have some indoor dining going on again. That's what we're hearing, and lots of people are starting to make plans. I'm really hopeful that there will be some limited indoor dining starting on the 1st of February. So let's all keep our fingers crossed for that.
Absolutely. So that's a good time to pivot and introduce our guest. He was a member of our conference committee and has been for a long time. John Mallett is our guest, and he's also been a good friend of mine ever since I met him, and that story's kind of shared in the interview. Met him a long time ago at Siebel Institute of Brewing during a class, but I think that, we were talking about kicking off this season 2 with him partly during the conference because he's such a great, iconic representation of the brewer educator. He's a well-read person who's generous with his advice and information and really believes in continuous learning, let's say, for lack of a better word. So I thought it's a fun interview to go back to, and I've always appreciated that with him as long as I've known him, is that he's a very generous supporter and wants to help people learn.
Yeah, I've known John since before he came to Michigan as well. And, while I think of him as a great brain and intellect, he's got the personality to match. And he's another one of these folks that we're really lucky to have in Michigan and helps make up the beer community. Like you said, he's so knowledgeable and scholarly and has for years taken a leadership role, not just in Michigan, but nationally, sharing education and developing the wealth and breadth of knowledge for brewers, not only through the Master Brewers Association, but he's also was fundamental in establishing the Hop Quality Group. He literally wrote the book on malt, and on and on and on. So he's one of those people that we're really lucky to have in Michigan. He's a key part of Bell's Brewery. I think for the consumer, John Mallett is maybe somebody who's not as much the face of the brewery. If you're on the brewing end of things, I think you really recognize that and identify with it. But from a consumer-facing point of view, maybe not so much. I'm not sure, but most of us are happy to count him as a friend, and we really have benefited from having John as part of the community, and he's an engaging person to boot.
Absolutely. So without further ado, we'll hand it off to John and myself. We were sitting inside of Bell's in the fall of 2018, working on a rising tide. Here's John Mallett in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Take it away, John.
Cheers.
So anyways, John, we have been kind of trading old stories, and we're talking about the history of the Guild and kind of the arc, and a couple different reasons, but we want to help member breweries kind of understand where we came from and what's going on. And while I know you weren't here in this state during those years, you have an interesting perspective in that you've collaborated across the country with a lot of different brewers and seen a lot of different things. And you're also a collaborator with the Guild in a lot of ways. So I'd love to start just backing up to like, how did you first find yourself in beer in the first place? Like what drew you to what has turned into a long career in the brewing world?
Well, yeah, I mean, I started out in beer in the mid-'80s in Boston, and I was super interested in craft beer and brewing, and some guys I was living with at the time, they were also passionate about food and beverage, and we'd drink a bunch of beer together and sample it and talk about the flavors and all, and we were all food and beverage professionals. I was cooking at the time, and I thought, it'd be kind of cool to work in a brewery. It's about first of the small breweries in Massachusetts that just opened up, and I got into one of them through the kitchen. And from the kitchen, I made a quick transfer over to the brewery after, a year or so, and started brewing there. And it was fantastic. I didn't know anything. The guys I was working with, they didn't know anything.
It's impossible to be wrong when nobody knows anything.
We made unbelievable Belgian sour beers. Unfortunately, we were being marketed as an English, craft, sort of traditional English ale brewery. But yeah, we made some pretty interesting sours then. I was always interested in the science of it and sort of production concerns, and so as I dove deeper in there through reading anything I could get my hands on, eventually that wended its way for me to go into Siebel Institute. There I really had the opportunity to ask some people who knew a hell of a lot more about this, and then that just, it's the case with anything. You start to answer a question, you end up with two more, and that was the.
Did that even start with looking for a Siebel Institute? It seems like that's a bit of a leap to even understand that they exist and that there's training in this pursuit that kind of came alongside of what started as a restaurant.
Yeah, well, with adventure. That brewery, at one point, because we, myself and the other guy who was involved at the time, Steve Slesser, we didn't know anything. And there was a guy who was in the area named Tim Morse, who had worked at Anchor Steam and had been around for a little while. He's not much older, but certainly had a lot more knowledge. And by talking to him, he did a bunch of training. I learned a lot, and I also learned about the existence of these brewing schools. Davis and Siebel, and Siebel was certainly within reach, and I reached for it.
Cool.
Coming from there, I went on to Washington, D.C. and ran a very different type of brewery, traditional German lager beers as opposed to traditional English, shipping brewery, so kegs and bottles going out the door, versus by and large beers going over the bar in Boston, and that really broadened the whole scope. And then from there, I went on to work at a bunch of different places, doing some consulting and building equipment and just being a resource around. I think one of the ones that was really seminal for me is Yuengling, America's oldest brewery, and just getting a sense of, here's a brewery that's stood on the same site since the 1820s. There's a lot of history.
Yeah,
that is soaked into those walls and floors there.
Yeah, that's something. They're retrofitting their own work,
Yeah. Yeah. The new one? You mean the one built in the 40s?
Yeah, right. So tell me a little bit about coming to Michigan. I remember the days well, but I'd love to kind of hear your perspective of what brought you here, and if you can kind of maybe describe what your take was on the Michigan scene at the time.
Yeah, so coming to Michigan, being at Siebel was great. I loved being in the city of Chicago, and one of the favorite places I like to go there is the Rainbow. I think that's a seminal favorite of yours as well, and Bell's Amber seems like always on there. And it was, when I was there, the amber was really good. You could tell it was inspired formulation, and sometimes whether that was, handling in the trade or otherwise, the beer wasn't as great as it could be. And I thought, Larry Bell had really built a hell of a brand and had some really nice beers and great intent. And when he, when you and I linked up and ended up coming out.
Which was, I think we met at Siebel, right?
Yeah, we
met
met there at draft school.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a
great week.
It's one of those times when you just connect with somebody and say, wow, this is just fantastic. This is awesome.
Yeah, great.
So coming out here to start to work with you and with Larry, and seeing the opportunity to make some changes, some improvements, some different ways of doing things, that was was great. Coming into Michigan, I remember there was Michigan had good breweries. There wasn't a lot of them. I remember a few years in, somebody said, "Oh yeah, the Michigan Brewers Guild is going to put out a deck of cards with a brewery on each card," and I was like, "That's not possible, because there's like 52 cards in a deck, and that's certainly not possible." And it was, and I think now
it worked. The deck of cards idea made the point I was trying to make.
And now, I mean, you'd have what, 6, 8 decks of cards?
Yeah,
it's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Back from those days of 20 or 30 breweries at the time. You could tell everybody was growing. I think that Michigan has got just a great sense and sensibility. I think that pure Michigan, that thing just dovetails so nicely with beer. It's about purity. It's about quality coming from a truly great place. And that's something that both the state and the beer, I think, embody. Mm-hmm. I think Michigan brewers have sort of celebrated that. There's certain we've got great innovative breweries that have stand for a while, breweries that are just focused on being breweries. And that's just, again, a great scene that we have had going on in Michigan from day one.
Yeah. And I think we'll get to the guild and kind of what its impact might have been, or what your first guild experience was in a second. I want to first kind of take a walk. We have an opportunity at this point in the story because you had traveled all over the country already as a consultant and as a brewer, but also doing brewery projects for others.
Yep.
For hire. You had a vast experience around the world, especially around the U.S. So there were a number of states kind of that were growing in different ways than others. I just remember we were looking up to Colorado, we were looking up to Oregon, we were looking at, there was different spots around the country that had this sort of chia pet growth, and then others that didn't. And I imagine there's a whole bunch of different reasons for that in terms of regulatory or licensing or otherwise, but I wonder if you could talk about, did you also spot in different areas certain elements that made it fertile for a market to be stronger than, say, another neighboring market or region?
Yeah, I definitely do. I certainly don't discount at all the fact that, in Michigan we have, you sort of think about the history of settlement in the U.S. and which ethnic groups came where. And I think about when Michigan was being settled, I mean, this is a time when there's a fair amount of German influence coming in. Very different approach than Scotch Irish or any other group out there. That if you think back to Chicago and the Chicago beer rights, these were about like, we want the right to sit on a Sunday afternoon in a park or in a public setting and drink beer with our whole families. And that, I think, is something that Michigan still embodies. I don't see that as much in, say, Arizona or Alabama.
Yeah, I thought you were just repeating Arizona for emphasis.
Yeah.
Or Arizona, did I say that one?
Yeah. So I think that's an element.
So some of that's cultural.
I think so. Yeah. And that I think another piece.
But it's not just east-west. It's not just older communities and younger, because the movement started west.
Yeah.
In terms of at least the Take Two, the craft beer movement.
Yeah, the innovation.
So there's something else about, like you said, sort of the cultures that settled the state or moved in or were driving the norms at the time.
I think so. I mean, that's my personal take.
Yeah. And then, do you remember your first sort of? We got the playing card story, which is great. Do you remember other early first memories of coming across the guild and what that looked like for you?
Well,
when I came into the state, the organization that I was closest aligned with was Master Brewers, and one that I proudly still am close with today. Master Brewers was sort of on a parallel track with the Guild. I mean, the Guild is the state, and Master Brewers is national with a state component. The interaction between those two groups, I think, has been fantastic. And I'll tell you, to this day, the model of the District Michigan Master Brewers and the Michigan Brewers Guild is held up as one of the best possible out there. That these groups are working in different areas, but they're working for the same industry and are complementary of one another. So when I think about, when I came in, I was very much a Master Brewers guy, and I think that, both yourself, Fred, you were just so instrumental in the Guild, and then, Larry's somewhat, his relationship with the Guild has sometimes been, right on, and sometimes different route. That I did not get involved as much in the Guild,
right.
But it was quite effective.
Can you speak to the mission? What is the function and purpose of the Master Brewers District, Michigan?
Sure. So the Master Brewers is a national, international organization that is really the knowledge experts on brewing technology and operations. And in the state of Michigan, we support our local region in that same. So it's a lot of educational activities. There's a networking component. It is very much sort of like production, not the business side as much as production of making quality beer. And the Master Brewers is doing its thing. The Michigan Brewers Guild, fantastic at promoting that in the state. Certainly on the legislative side, the activities there as well. So they're complementary. Both of them are supporting the brewing industry.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I won't. I'm kind of similar to you in the opposite side of that. I never really got ankle deep in the Master Brewers because my role was at the Brewers Guild, which is business and branding and marketing and message. And also, I think, if memory serves, you may or may know this, but I think prior to 2000 and prior to your arrival, related or otherwise, the MBAA District Mission was anemic and down to hardly any people.
Yeah,
and that the wake up of it was woken up by a resurgence of craft brewery personnel.
Yeah, absolutely. It actually
in recent
closed.
history.
It actually closed.
Wow.
So historically that was larger older breweries. So at one point it gets down to Stroh, and Stroh was the only people in the organization were really with Stroh, and at some point Stroh closes, so we don't need a district anymore. They turned over that organization and the purse for the organization to this nascent group of craft brewers, who then sort of got that thing airborne again, and it's been soaring ever since.
And one of the reasons I remember that is that we had to really work on navigating our function and our purpose, because we had a lot of brewers coming up into careers and coming up into jobs and looking for technical resources. And we had formed the Michigan Brewers Guild in '97, and so the word guild, I think, implies to some of those people great, here's a trade association for my people. They're going to support my technical approach to brewing. Mm-hmm. There just has some of that context there, and we had to keep reasserting that we are not that technical association. And so I guess I'm just kind of relating in parallel that it was really great to see the Master Brewers grow up in the region, and so that we could, I just remember the early conversations of this could, if we had both arms involved, this could be a really nice thing. And without one or the other, one organization starts trying to field balls they're not ready for.
Yeah, absolutely. And both, again, if you
Because
didn't
the
have
state
the
came
guild,
and asked the Michigan Brewers Guild, like, we have some upcoming legislation, we'd like your opinion, or the Master Brewers, how do you feel about self-distribution? It'd be like, lose my number.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So, I don't know if I remember, so you may be able to refresh my memory. Were you involved in the early conversations when we joined forces for the winter conference?
Yeah, I mean, we were running, I believe so, because I came into leadership on Master Brewers like pretty early on getting here. And, that opportunity of just having the Master Brewers has 4 meetings a year. One of them occurs in, hey, here's a perfect opportunity. All the brewers are in town for this other thing.
Yeah.
And maybe we could just kind of piggyback it together. And at one point it was just, hey, there's a spare room. You guys you go do what you need to do. And it took off from there. And I think that since then, the growth together of being able to provide simultaneous tracks on sort of, technically focused and also just, commercial aspects has been really great. I mean, you look at what that conference has grown into. It's really impressive.
Yeah, and I love that. It's just an interesting collaboration too, in terms of we both sit on a committee that helps develop the program, and I feel like early on there was some early awkward steps where you're trying to figure out who's going to do what and whose conference is it and how does this work and how does that work. And I'd love to hear your take on once we started sharing responsibilities for the program and saying, hey, listen, we've got technical resources here, not only in terms of finding speakers, but also in terms of knowing what the community brewers want to hear. What should we be talking to this year? And then on the flip side, the Brewers Guild has that awareness when it comes to branding and marketing and business. And so I loved watching that develop and mature into this pretty smooth collaboration. And I wonder, what are your thoughts in terms of, can you describe sort of the arc of how that improved over the years and even taking us to where we are today?
I think it improved tentatively and respectfully, first and foremost. It was sort of like nobody got uncomfortable. I think there were, times where, what's the, not intent so much as the direction or focus, and how do we balance those? I think that, one of the great things that the Michigan Brewers Guild has is a really solid revenue stream in terms of beer festivals and and the ability to put something like this on. Master Brewers operates on a much smaller budget. It's all sort of internally focused. Might bring in a couple of speakers or something like this, but for the most part, it's pretty self-contained. And being able to have the opportunity to link up with something that's a little bit larger and has some mass to it that's moving through the world has been just great. I certainly feel like the guild has driven a lot of the, where the thing is going to happen and how this is going to get put together, and we've really sort of slowly and nicely grown together. I think about this like, two trees growing up next to one another, and sort of they eventually end up forming sort of this solid unit, each is distinct and unique, but
you're not going to get them apart.
Yeah,
and they're the one that can stand the storm.
Yep.
To continue down the metaphor. And I feel like I'd love to hear, how does that relate to your opinion on what's important for the brewer community? I guess I'm thinking about a couple of things at the same time here. One of the other blendings, I'll set it up differently, that I like to see is brewery and brewer and other brewery people. So I like that it's become about developing the breweries as companies. It's been about developing employees and their skill sets, and that includes brewers and it includes non-brewers. And I like that development became, I think it helped indicate to people that we are more than one of these things.
Yep.
And I'll tell you, one of the other places that I think plays in there very nicely, and is yet another element that's grown together is our whole, the suppliers too. So that could be anything from insurance, vendors to hop growers to, equipment fabric. Any of these services that the brewing industry as a whole relies on. And some of them are more, technical or operations focused than others, but it's really fostered this great opportunity for all those elements to come together and have a common forum for meeting and talking and doing business.
Well, and I feel like it changes the perspective of I think it encourages people to look at your relationships as resources in a very positive way. So, the guy's not just selling you malt, or gal in the case of Penny, who I've learned so much from. They're not just selling you malt, they are your resource for malt education, or hops, or bottle caps, or glass, or
insurance.
Freight, or insurance. Like, I feel like there's a very, self-developing curriculum instinct in our community that people do learn to put together their own education by asking questions of the people around them, and that includes suppliers and colleagues and
it's a true
supposed competitors.
It's a true community. I mean, I love the fact that at the end of the day, people go out and have beer together. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. And to that end, I mean, I feel like that's part of the overall brewing community at large, and I think here in Michigan, we're fortunate to have tapped into it and created this environment and conference. I mean, can you speak to what that means to our segment? I mean, how important is that shared encouragement, shared education? What does it mean to the customer? What does it mean to our communities at the end of the day?
I think better beer business. I mean, I think it's important. It drives back to the culture of quality that we have in Michigan, and that's operationally how you operate a restaurant and a brew pub is just as much it is putting quality beer into a package and get into a consumer's hand, the beer lover's hands. That's, I think, been very important.
Yeah.
That all of these elements together are coming together to form just a great experience for people.
Yeah. And I think better beer, more quality experiences, more reliable, consistent experiences makes a more confident consumer, right? And so it ends up shoring up our brand value. It creates repeat. There's all these things. It creates repeat business. Can you you've always been since I've known you, very generous with knowledge, and you have a very natural, instinctive desire for people to learn, and you want to encourage people to do better. And I think there's a lot of that in our industry. It's why we love being in it. I'm speaking for both of us for a second, but I want to talk a little bit about that also includes a certain skill set, right? So like, how do we encourage others, not just about learning and being better, but if we want more people to be as generous as you are, if we want the next batch of brewers to be as generous with their technical knowledge and as cautious with their critique, what are points of advice we can give to breweries and say, listen, this is how to be a generous caretaker of our quality amongst each other. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it starts with doing what we're doing right now, which is sitting down and having a beer together, because it is, right. I mean, it is such a great forum for doing that.
I was talking about how big of an asshole you were before we were drinking beers, and by getting a beer, it stopped.
Yeah. Your commentary or me being an asshole? Or maybe both?
Well, mostly the commentary. But so it put an end to the shit talking because we're having a beer.
No, just kidding. That. No, I mean, all kidding aside, I do think it's important that we have beers together, and that's the opportunity that we have to share stories, that we have to share frustrations, and you're having that problem. I've had that problem too, and recognizing that
the problems I have, maybe somebody else learns from, and the problems they have, I learn from too. And so in some ways, it seems generous, but it may actually be self-serving, Fred. Who knows? Yeah. I know that I'm a better brewer because I, get a chance to talk to the best brewers in the country, the best brewers in the world about what they're experiencing as well.
Yeah. And any tips for so I don't know exactly how we'll use this, but I think it's an interesting point because, when you throughout these conversations, quality is a consistent theme that everybody believes we got to keep raising quality to be healthy, to be strong, and that also means people say, not all the beer is always up there, and so in general, I hear people encouraging to address quality issues, in-house, self-policing, all these different things. But I think it's really tricky to tell somebody their beer's off. And yet you've done that for hire, and then you've also done it as favors, and you've done it, not that that's your hallmark, but meaning you've been asked to provide this advice. So you have more experience at this than anybody I know. So what are some thoughts about how can we continue to develop a self-policing community? What's the best way for young brewers or old brewers to talk to each other about misses?
I think it's recognition that you miss, that the problems that if you see problems with somebody else's beer, those problems are probably not unique to them. You may have had those same problems, and being honest and open about that, I think that's an important, sort of leveling and humble place to start from. The recognition, the shared recognition that we all just want to be better. Like, I just wish I could make better beer. As good as the beer I make now is, I wish I could make better beer. And I think that's the case with all of us who are involved with this craft. I think those are the sort of the operating, the promontory that you need to operate from. And then just being, honest with yourself about how would you like this to come to you. I mean, the options are not at all. I don't want that. If there's a problem, I do want to know about it.
And you have to play that out.
Yeah.
Like, you got to hear the next two sentences.
Yeah.
Okay, if the beer did have this problem, right? Like, you have to stop the assumption that this feedback is absolutely false.
Yes.
And then the next sentences are, so would you rather not hear about it if the problem does exist? And the answer is, yes, I'd rather not hear about it. You should be in another department.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry to finish it out. It's just like that idea, sometimes people stop short.
But that's the case with anything.
They don't think about what it actually means.
I mean, if something's not going right in managing or sales or running a kitchen or whatever else, maybe you don't want to hear about it. I think for the most people would want.
Well, that's maybe a nice segue too in terms of. So, what's the advice for how to take feedback?
Thanks for listening and sharing while supporting Michigan breweries and craft beer everywhere.
Then
the Michigan Brewers Guild was formed in 1997 with its first summer beer festival taking place in July of 1998.
From a peer or
it's now 5 annual festivals are dedicated exclusively to Michigan beer brewed by more than 270 member breweries. The Michigan Brewers Guild exists to promote and protect the passionate Michigan beer industry.
I think you want to put your defenses up first and
learn
foremost.
more,
Make sure the ego is good and strong.
Visit us at mibeer.com or say hello on one of our social media pages.
I think it's recognition, the confidence in yourself
from far and near.
You do want to make it better, and that this person is probably not doing it gratuitously, but they're doing it out of a place of respect and care, and probably not an easy conversation with them. But I would just as soon smile and talk about the sports team than what they're doing. So thanking them a lot for that is something. And again, just try to check the ego. Recognize that we're not perfect at all.
It's a great point. The easiest, most harmful thing a competitive colleague could do is let you fail without saying a word, right? So if they're putting themselves at risk by coming forward in the first place.
Yep, absolutely.
So they've already done one of the most hard and helpful things, which is
a step forward and realize that you may not like them for it.
Yep.
And they're telling you anyways.
Yep.
That's huge. That's
And,
big.
to have that in your mind when they start talking, and like, yeah, I do want to hear it. And again, some problems you don't see. We don't see. I think just sensorially for beer, if I'm tasting beer, there are certain flavors that I don't taste well or at all, really. And there's others that I'm very perceptive at. And that's the case with everybody, and it's kind of a mixed bag. So if somebody's telling you this, you may not recognize a problem. Like thanks to them for them bringing up the fact that there's this problem in the first place, that they perceive this problem.
So I love having you here as kind of an advocate and ambassador for education, because it's a great tie-in where you relate to the Gog a lot. I wonder if you think about people in the brewery business, well, really, I suppose it translates to anybody, but especially somebody who's joined in the last 5 or 10 years. Either they've opened a brewery or they started a job or whatever. You have any tips or tricks in terms of, like, because I think about the Craft Brewers Conference, I think about any MBAA opportunity or the Michigan Brewers Guild Conference or anywhere else. And I imagine if I'm like a one-year brewer, I don't necessarily know where to start. And I don't necessarily know even how to get the most out of a conference. That if you went to the CBC as your first thing now, holy cow, like you need a conference just on how to go to the conference. So you got any tips or tricks or encouragement for somebody about how to go about extracting the most out of conference, workshop, continuing education for the young brewer?
I think about being able to define what your problems are, to go seek the solutions that way. You mentioned earlier vendors as being a real source of knowledge. I mean, I really look at that's one of the pieces that they sell. I mean, I think about again, a problem with malt or something like this, going and asking those questions, being open to it. I think it's also dependent on your learning style. I'm a voracious reader. I love to read and look at technical journals and all this. That's not the case for everybody. So my solution there might be different than somebody else's. In terms of navigating the conference scenario, I think that if you go in and you first thing you do is you look at that conference program, you figure these are the things that I really want to see. And then make the point afterwards. I would almost go to less things, but go and seek out those presenters or the other people at the end of a seminar topic, to go up there, to ask a question, but more importantly, listen to the other questions that are being asked, and maybe strike up a conversation. Those are the people in the room who are the most engaged. Those are the people that you really want to be hanging out with. Presenters are great, but the people asking questions of the presenters, those folks are fantastic resources too. And that'll help you to develop a network of fellow brewers. Might not be in your market, people in similar roles as you have perhaps, that you can rely on to bounce ideas off of. I think that's the network that's the real benefit of those conferences, is building that network of people that you can ask for their perspective and hear their approaches.
Yeah. I was gearing up to kind of ask you about what's the invitation to go to a conference at all, and I think that ends up being part of the answer. Is like, I feel like those relationships, that network, is part of the call as to why you pay the registration fee and show the hell up.
Yep, absolutely.
What is your vantage point, or how does that relate to your career and what you would recommend to others in terms of what has that meant for you in terms of, I know we share similar ideas on this, so I don't want to finish the question with your answer, but tell me about how your network has developed via that sort of experience.
I came into the whole thing and started to go to some of these opportunities. I was the young punk that was not, didn't have all the answers. There were much older and wiser and smarter people in the room, and linking in with others who had similar questions. That really was fantastic. And then, eventually making the jump over to being the presenter and being being part of that group that is presenting. If I have a question today, I can ask the world expert on it. We're on a first name basis, and hopefully they're asking me similar questions as well, that we're helping each other.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've built for my whole career is building those relationships and asking questions.
I feel like that also leads into could you talk about the benefits of presenting and encouraging people to step forward and figure out how to give their first presentation? What's the value to that? What's the invitation?
For me, the value is, one, the networking, the opportunity there for networking. Number two, the opportunity for learning. And that learning, you are never going to learn something so well as when you think, oh my God, there's going to be somebody in the third row that stands up and asks this question. And I want to know the answer to it. So you're not only researching what you're presenting on, but the stuff that's on the periphery of that as well. And I think it just sharpens the whole deal up incredibly.
Yeah.
It makes you a much more educated and better at your job.
I also feel like it starts turning the proposition around in terms of, I don't know, it makes me feel like less of a complainer if I find myself complaining about, why doesn't anybody fucking know this?
Yeah.
That's about when I start thinking, well, maybe we need to present on it. And maybe I need to present on it.
Yeah.
And instead of...
somebody better do something about this.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a great thing to remind people, is that there are things, there are gaps, there's always something that our community is weak on.
And for different perspective.
Right.
There was a time when I was going to brewing school, we had a real problem with haze. Now we have a problem with haze again today, but it's in the other direction, right?
Yeah, there's too many jokes there for me to filter them out. Yeah, things change, but I love that encouragement of, and it ends up kind of being another tie-in to the Guild and the MBAA in terms of, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about quality or branding or a voice for the industry. If you want to make change, you should get involved and have your voice heard. And I feel like you're saying that from an educational point of view, and it relates to all of it. But if you either want to make change, whether that's in yourself in terms of getting smarter and more aware of things, or you think the world needs to hear more stuff, get in.
I look at it, it just makes me better at what I'm doing, and I like being good at what I do. Who doesn't?
Yeah. So I guess in closing, tell me what you think. I mean, I find it to be utterly amazing at how many people have joined the brewing movement in the last 20 years, 25 years, and the amount of skill and knowledge that's out there. I mean, what does that look like from your vantage point about how much do we know now, and how much sort of skill and knowledge have we developed over the last 20 years, and where do we go from here?
Yeah, I think that, the place I absolutely love is the fact that there is such a diversity of beer being made today, different approaches, people coming at it from different directions. At the time when I first started brewing, there were brewers. There were only a few. They were making, very limited styles of beer, and this just great flowering of the American brewing industry today is really just a win for beer lovers. I don't know what else to say.
Well, and can you so where are we now in terms of looking ahead? What do you think are the challenges facing us from a technical point of view, and what do you think our biggest strengths are in heading towards them?
Well, I think that from a technical standpoint, I often operate from a real perspective of quality, and I'm going to throw in that when I think about quality, the way I think about quality is quality often exists as a problem. The problem of quality, of insufficient quality, I think can be defined by when there is a gap between expectation and execution. And this can happen in finance, it can happen in, obviously in beer quality, it can happen in certainly any aspect of our worlds, that somebody is expecting something from us, be that a service or a good, and if that expectation is not met by what you did, that's a problem. Now, that being said, at one point, the fact that the beers that you made might taste different on different days could be a real problem. Today, that may be an expectation that, I like these new and different flavors. The fact that you're making all these things, that is the expectation I now have. When at one point it was, could I have I'd like a can of generic light, and the same can of generic light that I had yesterday. So really taking a step back to think about quality as defined by the consumer, the user, the customer, is I think for me an important first step in this whole process. For me, then, if you go at it, take that through the technical lens. What are their expectations? If they're ordering a hazy beer, the expectations is it should be hazy. If it's supposed to be sour, it should be sour.
Yeah, and that creates the customer expectation and experience is the target. The technical approach to delivering it is the tool and the resource versus the end result.
Yeah.
That if they didn't like it, you can't say it was perfect. Well, it passed all of its tests.
Yeah.
They should have.
Yeah. It didn't pass their test.
Right.
And that's completely subjective.
Yeah.
Viewed through their eyes.
Awesome. Well, John, it's been a pleasure to share this crazy industry with you all these years, and appreciate everything you've done for the community and sitting with us here today.
Fred, it's always such a pleasure to spend time with you in whatever form. I tell you that you and I have been in really different competencies in the brewing world. I'm the technical brewer guy, and you're just awesome at this forward-facing component, and I can't love you more.
Thanks, brother.
It's a great partnership.
Thank you, brother. Looking forward to Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
We haven't developed this year's theme yet, so there's still time for input.
Okay, excellent.